The heavy doors of the federal courtroom creaked open like the slow, deliberate breath of a beast awakened, and in stepped a woman whose presence silenced every cough, whisper, and shuffling of shoes as if the very oxygen had thickened. She wore the bright orange of a federal detainee, her wrists cuffed tight in front of her, dog tags hanging heavily against her chest, and though her face was serene, her dark eyes locked with the judge's in a way that made seasoned attorneys look away. Lieutenant Commander Eva Ramirez, the Navy's most decorated female SEAL sniper, known in classified corridors by the code name Viper 1, stood straight despite the weight of accusation bearing down on her like an anvil. Behind her, 2 armed MPs flanked her with cold precision, but even they seemed nervous, their fingers twitching near their holsters. Not out of fear of escape, but out of quiet, shared guilt that no one had the courage to name. The courtroom was full. Senators in the back, military brass in dark suits, reporters who'd never worn boots on a battlefield, and a few tired veterans who looked more confused and outraged. On the prosecution's bench sat Assistant U.S. Attorney Howard Lane, young and sharp-jawed, a man clearly trying to make a name for himself by dismantling a hero. The United States versus LT Commander Eva Ramirez. The bailiff announced as if it were just another tax fraud case. Eva didn't flinch. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't search for sympathy. She was used to facing targets alone. The charges against her were severe: dereliction of duty, insubordination, and worst of all, willful compromise of classified intelligence to unauthorized foreign forces. In layman's terms, treason. Lane began his opening statement with the slow, rehearsed confidence of a man who thought the truth could be bent like wire. He painted Eva as a rogue, brilliant but unstable, a lone wolf who disobeyed direct orders during a covert Syrian op, resulting in the deaths of 4 Allied contractors. She acted beyond her chain of command, he said. Click and display a redacted photo of the operation zone on the screen behind him. And her unilateral decisions placed American lives, technology, and diplomacy in jeopardy. Some jurors nodded. Others remained stone-faced. Eva's appointed defense counsel, an aging Navy JAG named Stuart Leland, rose wearily to respond. My client cannot speak freely without violating multiple top-secret agreements, he said plainly. But I will prove she acted with integrity, compassion, and loyalty to her oath, an oath many in this courtroom have forgotten. The judge, a warm but no-nonsense woman named Honorable Carla Hughes, nodded slightly and instructed the court to proceed. Eva had not spoken a word. Her silence echoed louder than any testimony. As witnesses took the stand, anonymous intelligence officers clipped statements from Joint Task Commanders, grainy overhead footage. The narrative twisted slowly into a knot designed to strangle her reputation. But something didn't sit right. The mission logs were incomplete. The black box drone footage that would have shown the actual sequence of decisions was corrupted. None of Eva's SEAL team had been called to testify. In the gallery, a few veterans exchanged glances. "Where's her CAO?" One muttered. "Where's the squad?" whispered another. Eva's eyes remained forward, unflinching. Only once did she let her gaze flick to the bench when the interpreter's name was mentioned. Baser Alfatani, a 19-year-old local who had saved her team's life more than once. She had violated direct orders at night by evacuating him and 2 children from the strike zone when she was told to leave them behind. It wasn't just insubordination. It was defiance in the eyes of command. But for Eva, leaving them wasn't a choice. "I'm a sniper, not an executioner," she had once told a friend in confidence. But that friend was no longer anywhere near this courtroom. What the prosecution never mentioned was that Eva had sent multiple encrypted reports weeks prior, warning that something was wrong with the intelligence pipeline, that civilians were being miscategorized as hostile targets. Her reports had been ignored, buried, labeled pending review. And the night she refused a strike order, it wasn't out of emotion. It was because she had evidence the target building was a medical facility. But no one wanted that part of the story. The Pentagon needed a scapegoat, and Eva, a woman in a man's world, quiet, lethal, and inconveniently principled, fit the role perfectly. The moment that shook the courtroom came mid-morning, when an older analyst named Dr. Kearns tried to enter the witness stand but was blocked by a military aide. Whispers flew. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is this witness being silenced under a DOD gag order?" she asked sharply. Lane fumbled. Classified concerns, Your Honor. The judge leaned forward. Or inconvenient truth? Eva's handcuffs clinked softly as she shifted, the first visible sign of tension. Outside, protesters were gathering. Signs read, "Free Eva," silence by command, and "Oath before orders." The story was gaining traction. But inside, Eva stood alone. As the day drew to a close, the judge called for a recess. Eva was led back to the wooden doors, her steps heavy, her back still straight. Reporters tried to capture her profile, but she gave them nothing. In the holding room, her attorney looked at her with exhausted eyes. "They're setting you up," he said. "I know," she replied. "You sure you want to keep silent?" She nodded. "Until someone else speaks. If I talk, I lose more than freedom. I lose every SEAL who trusted me to do the right thing." Leland sighed. "You know someone upstairs is terrified of what you know. Then maybe they shouldn't have buried the footage," Eva whispered. That night, in her cold, fluorescent cell, Eva stared at the ceiling, counting breaths. 24 hours left until verdict day. Her hands ached. Her mind replayed the mission over and over. The moment she spotted the drone misfire, the screams in the rubble, the child clutching his sister. She had aimed once. One shot. Disabled the drone without taking a life. It was the most difficult shot of her career, and the one that cost her everything. But even now, Eva didn't regret it, because for the first time in a long time, she hadn't missed a real target, her conscience. Tomorrow, she would return to that courtroom in chains. But if she had to go down, she would go down silent and unbroken, unless someone else, someone with real rank and access, stepped forward. And somewhere across the Potomac, in a private military estate, a man in full uniform stood watching the news coverage with haunted eyes, his jaw clenched, his own conscience heavier than the medals on his chest. Admiral Thomas Grayson, her old commanding officer, the one man who knew the entire truth. And tomorrow, whether out of guilt, justice, or something deeper, he would make his move. The morning sun broke over Washington, D.C. with the kind of sharp, autumnal clarity that made everything appear honest, even if nothing truly was inside the courthouse where Lieutenant Commander Eva Ramirez once again walked into the federal courtroom in her orange jumpsuit and silver cuffs, her every step deliberate, her expression unreadable, her dog tags now silent witnesses to a story the world still didn't fully understand. The gallery was packed. Standing room only, and this time, reporters flanked the pews like vultures in suits, scribbling notes with pens that couldn't capture what the human I knew to be unjust. But the prosecution didn't care about truth. Howard Lane, arrogant and charming in that way Ivy League prosecutors sometimes are, stepped to the center of the room with a new vigor, emboldened by headlines painting Eva as the rogue SEAL and silent danger. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice syrupy with confidence, "when loyalty crosses into lawlessness, when valor becomes vanity, we must draw the line, no matter how decorated the uniform." He flicked to another slide, blurred images of compound in Aleppo, red circles around heat signatures that meant nothing to civilians, but to Eva meant everything. They were children. And then he introduced Exhibit D, a transcript of a voice recording attributed to Eva, allegedly sending coordinates of a sensitive target to a foreign contact. The courtroom buzzed, but Eva didn't move, because she knew exactly what Lane didn't say. The full audio had been edited, the second half conveniently cut, the half where she gave a direct order not to engage and demanded confirmation from Central Command that civilians had been evacuated. But none of that was allowed in evidence. Classified, they'd claimed, and so Lane told his version of truth, dragging Eva's silence through rhetorical dirt. She could have gone through proper channels, he insisted, pointing to her like a schoolboy tattling. Instead, she took justice into her own hands. Her lawyer, Stuart Leland, rose slowly, shaking his head. "Justice," he said hoarsely. "The only justice in that field was the bullet she didn't fire. This woman disobeyed an order to commit what she believed was a war crime. She didn't run from duty. She ran toward humanity." He turned to the judge. "But she can't speak for herself, because if she does, she violates the very oaths that are being used to strangle her today." The judge, Honorable Carla Hughes, rubbed her forehead. "I am not blind to irony, counselor," she murmured. Then something shifted. A name appeared on a pre-approved witness list. Captain Marcus Yates, Eva's second-in-command during the Syria operation. But when called to the stand, he didn't appear. Instead, a Pentagon lawyer stepped in and delivered a sealed envelope to the judge. Due to national security concerns, Captain Yates' testimony has been indefinitely postponed. The judge opened the envelope, skimmed it, and frowned so deeply it seemed to add years to her face. "Convenient," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the front row to hear. Eva's jaw clenched, her fingers pressed into her own palms. The system was closing in, brick by brick, and yet she remained immovable, like a sniper under fire, waiting for her window. Later that day, during recess, Leland approached her in the holding cell, his expression darker than before. "They're burying Yates," he said, "not just gagging him. Transferred him last night to a base in Germany. He was going to testify that your orders were overridden, that intel came from an unauthorized drone recon. He even had pictures." Eva's voice was calm but tight. "They'll find a way to make him disappear." "I'm afraid of that," Leland whispered. "They don't want this to become a scandal. You're their firewall." Then, for the first time since her arrest, Eva spoke clearly and deliberately. "I can end this." Leland blinked. "What?" "I can speak. Say what really happened. They'll never let me walk, but they won't be able to bury it anymore." Leland stared at her, then lowered his voice. "Eva, if you speak, they'll strip your rank, your pension, everything. And if the press runs it, they'll drag your family, your team." "What if someone else speaks first?" she interrupted. "Someone they can't silence." Leland looked at her with realization dawning. "You think he'll come?" Eva didn't reply. She didn't have to, because the one person who could unlock the truth, who held the raw footage, the mission files, and the command authorizations, was Admiral Thomas Grayson, her mentor, and the architect of the entire operation. But Grayson had gone dark ever since the charges were filed. She hadn't heard a word. That night, something unexpected happened. A low-level clerk in the JAG office leaked a photo to the press. Eva, holding a wounded Syrian child in one arm, firing a sidearm with the other, blood on her uniform, her face a mixture of focus and sorrow. The image went viral within hours. Public opinion turned. "This doesn't look like a traitor," one headline read. But inside the courtroom the next morning, Lane doubled down. "Heroism is no excuse for insubordination," he barked. "A rogue sniper, no matter how noble, puts us all at risk." Then Eva stood, her first time voluntarily addressing the court. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You wish to speak, Commander?" "Just briefly," she said. Her voice was strong, even, measured like a heartbeat under stress. "I follow my training. I follow my moral compass. I protected civilians because that's what we're told separates us from monsters. I didn't act out of rage or pride or politics. I acted because I was the only one left who could act, and I would do it again." She looked directly at the jury. "That doesn't make me a traitor. That makes me a soldier." The courtroom was frozen. The judge said nothing. The prosecution didn't object. And outside, the crowd had grown, chants rising against the windows. Inside, a sense of tension was climbing toward something no one could see, but everyone could feel. The judge announced she would deliver her pre-verdict statement in 48 hours. That night, in a dim-lit office on the 4th floor of the Pentagon, Admiral Grayson watched Eva's speech from a secure terminal. He hadn't spoken publicly in over 6 months, but he knew now the time for silence had passed. Because what the courtroom didn't know, what Eva herself didn't know, was that Grayson had in his possession a full backup of the drone footage, recovered by a whistleblower technician before the logs were wiped. It showed everything. The mislabeling of targets, the children running from a blast, Eva's override code, her mercy shot to the drone, the denial order that came after. And now Grayson had to decide: protect the system or honor the soldier he'd once called the best he'd ever trained. Outside his window, the American flag twisted violently in the wind, as if nature itself was warning him. Inaction was no longer an option. Inside her cell, Eva sat cross-legged on her cot, eyes closed, breathing slow. The courtroom would soon make its decision. But the story was no longer in their hands alone. Someone out there held a trigger that could change everything, and the world was watching. The third day of the trial dawned beneath a slate-gray sky as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath, and the courthouse, flanked by rising protesters and guarded by an uneasy line of federal marshals, felt more like a crucible than a temple of justice. Inside, the tension was suffocating, and every bench in the courtroom overflowed with government staffers, brass in silent suits, and civilians craning for a glimpse of the now world-famous lieutenant commander, Eva Ramirez, who walked in once again shackled and silent, her jaw locked, her posture still unbent beneath the ridicule and suspicion pressing in from every angle. But there was a difference in the air, something unspoken but felt, like the ship before a storm breaks, and though Assistant U.S. Attorney Howard Lane strutted to the center of the courtroom with the smugness of a man who believed he'd already won, his eyes flicked just briefly toward the rear doors each time they opened, his confidence cracking like ice under pressure. Today's witness, a technical analyst named Janice Kerr from the DIA, was meant to tie the final knot around Eva's career and neck, presenting satellite data that confirmed the presence of enemy combatants at the Aleppo compound. She took the stand, straight-backed, hair in a tight bun, voice sharp, citing pixelated heat signature maps and algorithmic assessments. Based on confirmed thermal data, she said, the zone showed at least 5 armed individuals in the perimeter. And did the defendant receive this data prior to her decision to abort the drone strike? Lane asked. Yes, Kerr nodded. It was an encrypted briefing uploaded to her ops tablet. No further questions. But Stuart Leland stood up with something different in his eyes, something like fire. Ms. Kerr, he said, voice low, have you ever served in combat? No, sir. Ever held a rifle, taken enemy fire, or extracted civilians from a war zone? No, so you don't know what a terrified child looks like through a thermal lens, do you? She hesitated. Thermal doesn't discriminate, sir. The algorithm identifies shape, motion, and heat patterns. And if that algorithm is wrong? Leland asked, if a child with a water jug looks like an adult with a rifle? She said nothing. He turned to the jury. You see, ladies and gentlemen, we are convicting a woman based on pixels and programs, while ignoring her boots-on-ground decision to save lives. The judge leaned forward. The point is made, counselor. And then it happened. The courtroom doors creaked open. A tall, broad figure in full navy dress blues stepped to the threshold, metals gleaming against the dark wool, and every uniformed officer in the room, whether Marine, Navy, or Air Force, rose instinctively to their feet. Gasps followed. The judge herself stood. Admiral Thomas Grayson, she breathed. The prosecutor turned pale. Reporters dropped pens. Stuart Leland blinked in disbelief. Eva's head turned slowly, and for the first time in the entire trial, her jaw went slack, just slightly. Grayson marched forward with the heavy dignity of a man who had seen war, lost friends, buried truths, and carried guilt in his chest like shrapnel. Without waiting to be sworn in, he addressed the court. Your Honor, he said, I request to testify as a material witness on behalf of the defense. Lane scrambled to object. This witness was not disclosed. Overruled. Judge Hughes snapped. He's an admiral, not a ghost. Ma'am, Grayson continued, this trial is being conducted under the illusion of incomplete data. The footage presented to this court is edited, redacted, manipulated. I have in my possession full, uncut mission footage from Operation Iron Candle. It clearly shows that Lieutenant Commander Ramirez acted under a moral and strategic obligation to override an illegal drone strike authorized by a compromised chain of command. A stunned silence fell. Compromised? The judge repeated. Yes, Grayson said grimly. A defense contractor, Vigilant Tech, had inserted false data into our recon feeds to inflate threat assessments, so their experimental drone systems would see combat testing. Eva's refusal to follow through with the strike interrupted that operation and made her a liability. That's why they buried her. That's why Captain Yates was transferred. Lane stood. That's hearsay. He has no proof. I have the footage, Grayson barked, producing a secure hard drive and placing it on the witness table. Encrypted, time-stamped, chain of custody intact. The courtroom was in chaos now. The judge called for order, banging the gavel with urgency. "This court is now in recess," she declared. "I will review this evidence in chambers. No one leaves this building until I reconvene." Guards locked the doors. Eva turned toward Grayson as he stepped down, and for the first time her eyes glistened. "You came," she whispered. He looked down, ashamed. "I should have come sooner." The next 2 hours were agonizing. Inside her holding cell, Eva sat motionless while outside, reporters speculated, analysts scrambled, and the entire internet trended with one name, #Commander Ramirez. Finally, the doors opened. The judge returned to the bench, her expression thunderous. "I have reviewed the footage," she said, eyes locking with Lane, "and I am disgusted." She turned to the jury. "You are dismissed. The charges against Lieutenant Commander Ramirez are vacated, effective immediately." The courtroom erupted. Some clapped. Others wept. The MPs moved to remove Eva's cuffs, and her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the shock of finally being free. Grayson met her at the edge of the bench. "I'll face my own hearing for withholding this," he said. "But it was worth it. You reminded me what our uniform is supposed to mean." Eva nodded, voice steady. "And you reminded me I wasn't crazy." Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with press, veterans, and citizens holding handmade signs. "Honor Eva. Seal, not scapegoat." She stepped to the mic only once. "I was trained to shoot threats," she said. "But sometimes the biggest threats were suits, not uniforms." The crowd roared, but Eva didn't linger. She disappeared into a waiting SUV with Grayson, Leland, and a team of federal agents who promised full investigation into Vigilant Tech's contracts. For the first time in months, she could breathe, but deep inside, Eva knew something darker was still coming, because someone had ordered that strike, someone far above Lane, and she wasn't done fighting yet. The silence following the gavel's final bang echoed like thunder across a courthouse that had seconds before erupted into a maelstrom of gasps, sobs, cheers, and panicked whispers. But the real detonation hadn't happened yet. Not in that courtroom. Not even in the headlines that explode with phrases like "Seal cleared in shocking cover-up" or "Admiral blows whistle in treason trial twist." Because the true blast radius began expanding the moment Admiral Thomas. Grayson stepped before the press that afternoon, his uniform crisp, his medals gleaming not with pride, but as a kind of heavy penance. And when he adjusted the mic under a gray D.C. sky, the world stopped to hear what a 4-star admiral, once revered as the architect of Joint Task Force Phantom, had to say about the trial that almost destroyed Lieutenant Commander Eva Ramirez. "I speak today not as a flag officer," he began, voice hoarse, "but as a man who lets silence become complicity." Cameras clicked like gunfire as he continued. "What happened to Commander Ramirez is a consequence of 2 cancers within our institutions, unchecked defense contracting, and a culture that punishes moral courage. She disobeyed an unlawful order. She saved lives. And for that, they tried to bury her." Behind him, Eva stood quietly, her civilian clothes loose on a frame, still recovering from months of solitary confinement. Her face pale but focused, arms crossed over her chest like a sniper still reading wind, speed, and distance. Grayson didn't stop. A private defense firm, Vigilant Technologies, altered intelligence to secure combat field testing for its drone AI system, Project Falcon Wing. The target data was falsified. When Commander Ramirez intervened, she not only exposed the manipulation, she prevented the deaths of non-combatants, children. He raised a small black device. "This is the complete footage of Operation Iron Candle. It's now being turned over to the Department of Justice, and I am requesting full congressional inquiry into Vigilant Tech's relationship with multiple Department of Defense officers." The room nearly exploded. Reporters yelled over each other. Aide staff were sprinting out to issue statements. But Eva kept still, her mind focused not on the cameras, not on the justice finally beginning to bloom, but on the man who hadn't shown his face yet, Brigadier General Rourke, her former CO and the one who had greenlit the strike order while keeping his own hands clean. He hadn't appeared at the trial, hadn't issued a word of support or condemnation, and now, with Grayson's testimony echoing across every major network, his silence grew suspicious. That evening, Grayson and Eva sat in a private room at the Navy Memorial Museum, off limits to the public, with Stuart Leland and 2 members of the DOJ's War Crimes Division. We have a list, one agent said grimly, sliding over a classified manifest. Several officers, 3 senators on the Defense Oversight Committee, and at least 2 vigilant board members were in the loop. We believe Rourke was the primary liaison. Eva's fingers drummed against her knee. And what about the rest of my team? Unreachable, the agent replied. Captain Yates surfaced in Germany under a different assignment name. We're trying to extract him quietly. Grayson looked at Eva. It's bigger than we thought. Eva's laugh was bitter. It always is. By the next morning, Congress had scheduled a hearing, and Eva was invited, not subpoenaed, to testify. For the first time in months, she walked through a federal building without cuffs. Her civilian suit hung awkwardly, but her stride was steady. The halls of Capitol Hill were filled with murmurs, aides craning their necks as she passed. Inside the committee chamber, cameras rolled live. She was sworn in, took her seat, and when asked to state her name and rank, she hesitated only briefly before answering. Former Lieutenant Commander Eva Ramirez, United States Navy SEAL. The word former hit like a nail driven into oak, but she didn't flinch. For the next 2 hours, she recounted everything. Her doubts about the target data, her repeated attempts to raise red flags, the mission night itself, the civilians, the drone she shot down, the threats from above, and her eventual arrest. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She told it like a soldier reads a sitrep. Clear, direct, unshakable. The room was riveted. Even the most hardened senators blinked back discomfort. Then the questioning turned to vigilant tech. One senator asked, "Do you believe private defense firms have too much influence over field operations?" Eva stared directly at him. "They don't just have influence. They have leverage. Sir, when profit is tied to performance metrics and performance is measured in blood, civilians become collateral and soldiers become scapegoats." The room fell silent. After the hearing, Eva exited into a swarm of microphones and didn't speak again. She simply nodded once and disappeared into a waiting car, joined by Grayson. "You didn't have to keep calling me sir," he joked softly. "Force of habit," she replied. But beneath the calm, a storm still brewed. Rourke still hadn't surfaced. No official statements. No press conferences. And then, for days later, just as DOJ prepared to execute subpoenas against vigilant tech executives, a mysterious, classified incident occurred at a naval base in Virginia. An encrypted data vault was compromised and wiped clean. Someone was burning the trail. Eva met with Grayson that night in a private cabin outside Annapolis. "He's going to run," she said. Grayson nodded grimly. "Or take someone down with him." "Then we don't wait," she said. "We make the next move." "You want to go public?" "No," she said. "We go back to the beginning." She pulled out an old encrypted flash drive, one she kept hidden even through her arrest. "There's one more piece. Something I didn't give the court." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because it proves beyond any doubt that the entire operation was compromised, but it also implicates an allied government. If we release it, it doesn't just sink Rourke. It causes an international scandal." Grayson leaned back. "That's above both our pay grades now." "But not our conscience," she whispered. And just like that, Chapter 4 came to a close. Not with courtroom cheer or a media parade, but with 2 veterans seated in silence, the fire crackling between them, holding evidence powerful enough to end careers, reshape alliances, and destroy the final fortress of lies. What they did next would either complete the mission or burn them both alive. The final reckoning began not with bullet or a headline, but with the quiet hum of military-grade hard drive sliding across a conference table in a sealed federal chamber deep beneath the Pentagon, where Eva Ramirez sat across from the Secretary of Defense himself, flanked by Admiral Grayson and 2 stoic DOJ investigators, all watching with taut silence as a technician decrypted the last remaining piece of evidence, a 14-minute combat log video that, unlike anything seen so far, captured not only the heat maps and drone feeds of Operation Iron Candle, but audio, direct command chat logs, and most damning of all, the explicit override command sent by Brigadier General Malcolm Rourke himself, instructing the mission AI to ignore non-combatant flags in pursuit of high-value kill confirmation. The room fell still as the video displayed Eva's voice, sharper and younger, barely holding together under field pressure, begging for mission abort, warning command that she had identified children on site, and then the faint sob of a local interpreter screaming in Arabic as the drone prepared to strike. The footage then showed her taking the shot, one clean, surgical bullet from her suppressed M82 that clipped the drone's intake just seconds before it fired, sending it spiraling harmlessly into an empty field. That was the shot, the one that saved innocent lives, the one that destroyed her career, the one that finally, now, had saved the truth. The Secretary of Defense leaned back, hands steepled, his face unreadable. "You understand what this means, Commander," he said, voice low. "This goes beyond Rourke, beyond vigilant tech. If we pursue this publicly, we implicate intelligence sharing violations with NATO allies. There will be fallout." Eva looked at him without flinching. "There already was. You just didn't see the bodies." Grayson spoke next, steel in his voice. "Sir, she has held the line long enough. Now you do your part." The secretary stared at the drive, then nodded once. "We'll handle it." But Eva knew what that meant. Backroom firings, sealed indictments, classified reprimands. Quiet justice. A bureaucrat's version of atonement. So she walked out of that room and made one final decision. Not to fight anymore in courts, not to seek reinstatement or vengeance, but to protect what the system had failed to, the truth. 1 week later, she stood before a packed auditorium at Georgetown University, not in uniform, but in civilian clothes, speaking to a hall full of ROTC cadets and national security students. "I am not here as a SEAL," she said. "I am not even here as a veteran. I'm here as someone who was trained to end lives and chose instead to protect them. You will face orders one day that test not your discipline, but your humanity. You must decide what kind of soldier you want to be before that day comes." The applause was thunderous, but Eva didn't linger. She exited quietly, slipping into a side hallway where Grayson waited. "They accepted my resignation," he said. 36 years in uniform. "And you know what I'm most proud of?" Eva shook her head. "You." She looked away, unsure how to respond. "You could have saved yourself months ago," he added. "Why didn't you?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Because I didn't want to win with silence. I wanted the truth to walk out with me." And it had. Rourke was removed under sealed charges, forced into early retirement with 0 honors. Vigilant Tech lost its Pentagon contracts and was facing a federal probe. Captain Yates had been honorably reassigned and later awarded for whistleblowing. The children Eva saved now lived safely in a refugee program abroad, and Baser, the interpreter, had started a nonprofit to help war orphans. Eva herself refused all book deals, declined every invitation for fame. She moved to a quiet rural town in Virginia, started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and trained young women for ROTC with calm precision. The nightmares still came, her trigger finger twitching in sleep, her body aching from injuries untreated during confinement. But she never doubted her choices. Not once. One afternoon, months later, a young girl knocked on the training center door. She was barely 17, wiry and determined. "Are you Ramirez?" she asked. "I want to learn to shoot like you." Eva smiled, stepped back, and held the door open. "Then the first thing I'll teach you," she said, "is when not to pull the trigger." The story didn't end with medals, though one quietly arrived in the mail, a Distinguished Service Cross. No ceremony. Eva kept it in a drawer, because her greatest reward wasn't vindication or applause. It was the knowledge that when everything tried to break her, her command, her government, even the silence, she didn't break. She stayed on mission. She remembered who the real enemy was, and she took the shot that saved the truth.